There's been a whole lot of activity across all US states and Puerto Rico. They don't want to leave them out of the fun. So we're seeing a lot of new bills that are related to AI. We're also seeing a lot of sort of regulatory activity and sort of guidance issuing from local AGs and other authorities in the states. We've seen sort of like different versions of bills. Some bills are sort of like over the last couple of years, we've seen like the Colorado versions of it, where they're sort of issuing an entire like AI bill that kind of is reminiscent of the EU AI Act in a very like high level flavor. But we also saw bills kind of in the Utah flavor of the bill where they're saying, oh, existing laws apply to AI, which I thought was an interesting law to publish because it begs the question what was happening before and what are there laws that don't apply to AI, which is kind of interesting. There's about 26 laws that are going into force or we're going into force in June, and there's a lot of bills that are currently being debated. Some of them are industry specific, some of them are sort of topic specific. So you can see, again, a wide variety of AI bills. You see some sort of comprehensive ones like the Colorado ones. You see some that are topic specific, like focused on transparency or bias testing. Some of them are industry specific. So you'll see some that are focused on product safety. Some of them are focused on child safety. And then you'll see some really interesting ones that are almost like not device, but like product specific, like chatbots. We've seen some interesting activities or issues happen with chatbot. The individual who managed to trick that car reseller or dealership into selling them a car for like $1 or something like that. That was outstanding. Wish I could have thought of that. Would have liked me a pickup truck for $1, but yeah. So now there's sort of like a lot of rules and guidance issuing going around that. But really,
Beatrice, can I ask you a question?
with that.
This is intended to be a softball, but it's a complicated question. So, with all these new laws, I feel like it's reminiscent of like the 2018 era of when privacy was first being regulated. But now, fast forward, we're all reminded like privacy has kind of always been regulated.
Mhm.
If you evaluate the myriad of things that you just went through, including the industry specific or audience specific laws, do you have a sense of whether these are duplicative of like old laws that are on the books that, hadn't been applied to the new technology yet, or are we truly changing the regulatory landscape for this newer technology?
I think it's an interesting question. I think in some ways it's because we need to keep in mind sort of the political landscape that some of these laws are occurring in. There are some states where the legislatures that these laws are getting passed in are very different than the AGs that are currently in control of the consumer protection agencies. So there might be sort of a difference between how existing laws might be applied and how the legislature expects AI to be regulated. So I think that there might be a little bit of tension there. So the legislature might be trying to compensate. In some states, you see AGs trying to compensate for the fact that they feel like laws are not necessarily sufficient. When we first started talking about AI and we started teaching the IAPP AI course, one of the first things that we started talking about was AI is regulated the same way you would regulate a human doing something. So if a human is regulated a certain way because they're carrying out a certain activity, then the AI should be regulated the same way. But in reality and in the application of it, it does get more complicated because humans have intent and it's a lot more different. It's a lot more difficult to ascribe intent to computers. So I think in some ways having dedicated laws does help sort of fill in the gaps where existing regulations have characteristics that are typical of humanity that algorithms might not have. And some existing laws are just not written in a way that really accounts for the way AI operates. Like if we see in the next bullet point, we're talking about child safety. I don't think any of us really imagine that a child safety law trying to prevent child pornography from being distributed on the internet is not intended to cover AI generated imagery, but the way we wrote these laws 20 years ago wasn't necessarily accounting for that fact. And a lot of the time, those laws were written with a very specific public policy in mind, which was the protection of the children, the specific individuals. So when the law was written that way, and when you're now faced with AI generated imagery, including cartoons or animated content where the children in question don't exist, there are some clever lawyers out there that are making arguments saying, well, this content doesn't really affect anyone because the children are not real. But in reality, it does affect society. So there is a purpose for creating these subject matter specific laws. So I think that there are gaps that we do need to fill in.